Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the US Futures Weekly Chart Analysis for the week ending 21st of November 2025. The first chart is the US Dollar Index Futures, which closed higher this week. They pushed above this little intermediate level in here, which was a good move really. Volume was reduced and below the average, so prices really just floated up on a lack of selling pressure rather than really being bid higher with increasing demand. That being said, it does show that supply in this zone, where I anticipated there would be a little resistance, isn't particularly strong, and that's allowed price to float up with relative ease and into that new level. Price closed at this level here, which is effectively where price broke down from over here. Those levels are always a little important. And closes in particular are equilibrium levels where there's a balance found between buyers and sellers for the period, in this case weekly. The higher close this week has put associated markets under some pressure, especially the currencies, as you'd expect. We'll have a look at that as we move along. The next chart is the E-mini S&P. This is S&P 500 index futures, and they closed lower this week, which is unsurprising. We were expecting a test for supply to some extent. Price pulled back. It did draw out supply. You can see the increased and above average volume shows that there was supply drawn out, and that's why the market didn't really just test for supply. It pulled back with some intent, found some support at this level, which is effectively this bar's low where support was found previously, and it closed off the weekly lows, showing you that there was some buying support emerge in the market. Note that the buying support wasn't strong enough to carry price back above this level, which is this bar's low. This is previous support in the background here. That's been broken. It's always going to be a little more difficult to push back above a level where price has broken down previously, even if it's only a minor breakdown. So price was bid back up to that level and closed just below the important level in the end. You'll generally see price go sideways here and attempt to build up some strength, but that's the general response. When price has encountered supply, like it appears it has done this week, and buying support has emerged, then there'll be an attempt to support the market at this level. You've got a minor level just below that through there, and then the next important level comes through here. So if supply continues to be drawn out and price continues to pull back, that's the level where the market may attempt to find support and see if buying support will emerge again. It's less likely, but always possible, the market will attempt to push higher here in response to the buying support that was encountered this week. I think it'll find itself difficult to get back above this level, at least next week. There's no doubt that supply was drawn out this week. There was an attempt to support the market. We'll just have to see which side gains the upper hand, the buyers or the sellers. Next chart is the US Treasury 10-year note futures, which closed higher this week. Price did find some support at this level. It's pushed higher and closed just above that bar's high. Wasn't strong enough to move up to the highs of the range, but it was a good push higher with an increased spread and increased volume supporting that increased spread. So that was a good push higher. You would expect, after some support's been found through here, the market will attempt to move up to the highs of the range, possibly even up to this high here, which is the more important high. Price has been trading within this down bar's range on high volume for quite some time now. And it really will be when price breaks out above or below it that we'll see some sort of significant price movement. This is copper price futures. Copper price futures came back and tested for supply this week below the previous bar's close. Spread narrowed, as you'd expect. Volume reduced, but it remained just slightly above average, so there is supply being drawn out. And when the market tests for supply like this, and volume isn't low, but spread does reduce and remains narrow, and the close is positive up near that week's high, it suggests that the buyers are in there supporting the market. They're absorbing the supply. They're keeping the spread narrow as price pulled back, and then they've bid it up to close near its highs for the week or for the period, weekly in this case. So there was supply drawn out. That supply appears to have been absorbed, and that's caused the spread to be narrow and the close up high within this week's traded range. And that's generally a positive. You'll likely see this market attempt to move higher in response, probably up to the highs of the range. I'm not sure there'll be enough strength for an attempt to break out, a challenge to this level, but we'll see. The market has shown this week that there is buyers in the market, and they're defending the market against supply. Gold price futures. Gold price futures also tested for supply this week, unsurprisingly. Last week we saw supply drawn out. This week the market has tested for supply below the previous bar's close. Volume was reduced and about average. So similar to the copper price futures, there was sufficient buyers in the market. There was sufficient demand to keep the spread narrow this week or reduced over the previous week's traded range. And the close was in the top half of the bar, albeit just slightly. And that's telling you that there is demand in the market stronger than the supply that's been drawn out. And there may even be a challenge to this little minor level. This isn't a really serious level here. It's an intermediate level within the range. There may be a challenge to that next week because this market has shown you that there is good buying support in the market. Silver price futures. Silver price futures are always a little more volatile than gold, and that's pretty much what you've got this week. Overall, the market has tested for supply, just in a slightly more volatile way than you've seen in the previous two charts. Spread did narrow and pull back below the previous bar's close on reduced and just slightly above average volume. That's kind of what you expect in this market, where there's always a little more volatility than the previous two we've looked at. It is noteworthy, though, that the bar has closed about mid-bar, maybe just a touch below mid-bar. So that suggests that there was more supply drawn out compared to the demand in this market. So you may get a secondary test for supply early next week, something like this, a little bit of a pullback, hopefully a close up near that day or couple of days high. And then if supply is found to be low, there may be an attempt to push higher in response. It looks like gold would like to go higher, or it's certainly got the demand profile to say that it could. It does appear that a bit more supply was drawn out in this market, so you may see a secondary test for supply early in the week prior to any serious attempt to push higher. Like crude price futures, they continue to pull back, still in consolidation mode in response to the previous wider spread up bar, but now prices move back below mid-bar, which is suggesting that the market's not as strong as it may have appeared. It's drifting lower on average volumes. Demand isn't there to push price higher at the moment, but price is still trading within this bar's range. That was the important bar, at least in the near term it is. A break below that level would certainly be pretty serious weakness. But at this point, the market is trading in consolidation mode in response to this up bar, and while it's not looking particularly strong, it's holding on quite well at this point in time. It doesn't look like it's going to break down. It's just drifting lower on average volumes. So we'll just watch and see how this progresses over time. Into the currencies now, and with the US dollar being a little stronger this week, it's not surprising to see that the currencies generally moved lower. You see price pulled back here. This is the euro US dollar currency pair, and it has closed at these two levels here, the low of this bar and the push higher on this bar that's been carried across with this dotted line. And that's just where price has traded this week. It's pulled back. It's found some modest support there. I note that volume increased to the average, so there was some supply drawn out. The fact that it's held on does suggest that there was some buying support in the market, at least sufficient to keep spread relatively narrow and hold price at this level. Let's see what the pound's doing. The British pound has been a little weaker than the euro more recently, and price has pulled back and closed right at this level, which is the low of this bar here. Price has effectively traded sideways here on average volume. So that was holding on pretty well. The weakness wasn't completely overwhelming, and the market's attempting to hold on and not break down further. Any further breakdown here will likely see the market come back to this level. If we look at the euro, and we're back to the euro here, and you can see price could pull back to one of two levels here if weakness continues and the US dollar continues higher. So you've got a fair gap here. I would expect this market will attempt to hold on at this level, similar to what we just saw on the pound. Moving on to the Japanese yen currency futures, and they really did move lower again this week, although the close well off the week's low does suggest that buying support of some degree did move in. Prices closed well below this level where the market was attempting to hold on over the previous 2 weeks. Volume increased to about average, so that's really showing you that supply was drawn out and reasonable buying support did emerge at some point during the week. So watch to see if this market does attempt to recover some of the lost ground. It's going to be difficult for it to recover above this level or this level. Always possible. It's going to be more difficult. It'll have to find substantial buying support to move above those levels. More likely, it'll push up like this and then fail again at that level. A close below that bar's low would be pretty severe weakness. So we'll just see how that plays out. Aussie dollar currency futures, and they pulled back this week as you would expect with the strength in the US dollar. Prices pulled back to this level. I did actually think it might hold on at that level, but it didn't. It broke down a bit further than that. It actually tested the lows and it found enough support to close back above them on increased and slightly above average volume. So there was some supply being drawn out across these markets this week, certainly more than there has been recently. And that will suggest to you that the US dollar is stronger than some of these markets may have appeared. Some position changes may be taking place. There was buying support emerge here, so I won't be surprised to see an attempt to move higher, which is likely to be unsuccessful overall. But at least in the near term, there may be an attempt to push higher and then perhaps pull back and close at a similar level again next week. Bitcoin futures pulled back this week, kind of as suggested last week. Price ended up in that zone that I've marked in green, which we suggested last week was where the market would likely move down to. There was always a chance that the market had overshot on this bar and it would attempt to recover. That didn't really happen at all. The market made a half-hearted attempt to recover here and then just pushed lower for the week. Some buying support did emerge off the week's low and defend against supply at this level, which was good to see. I expect the market will attempt to trade in this zone and attempt to recover after what has been a fairly steep sell-off. If supply continues to be drawn out, the next level down is here. It lasts to there. This is the zone. And you can see the price is about 69 to 76. But at this point, I would expect the market to make a reasonable attempt to hold on at the current level, which is the lows of this bar. Volume was very high this week, the highest volume for quite some time. That'll suggest to you that there was supply being drawn out, and the close well off the week's low is suggesting that there was buying support emerge, and it's defended against supply at the lows of the range. So this is an important level. And I think it is an important level. If you go back a little, it really does come from right over here. And the market has traded at that level. It's a significant level. As price was coming up, this is where it found its highs. It broke through with a gap, found support as it came down and tested. We've had two strong test bars at this level before price found enough support to push higher. And now price has come back to this level again. So this is an important level on the chart, and it's not surprising at all that there's been an attempt to defend against supply at this level. I don't expect any sort of V-shaped recovery. Much more likely that the market attempts to find support over some time, sort of in that range like that, just above and below this important line, around the $84, and build up some strength for a period, kind of like what happened over here, something like that, and then an attempt to push higher if strength continues to be found. And bars like this one and this one are exactly what you want to see. Bars that dip lower and then recover to close up near their highs. So we'll watch this and just see how this progresses over some time. I'm not expecting a V-shaped recovery. It is always possible, but it's less likely. Just back to the US dollar index futures. Price has pushed higher this week. Volume was low, so price has really just floated higher on a lack of selling pressure. It doesn't appear there's any great or serious supply at this level, where I thought there may have been. So that will allow this market to continue higher on any decent demand. You may find a little test for supply early next week, like this. And if supply is found to still be low, then there may well be an attempt to push higher in response, probably up to this level. Okay, thanks for your time. Back again next week. See ya.